Good afternoon, teachers. Today I will be doing my TOK presentation on the topic of science and perception. My RLS is that Stephen Hawking has made a shocking new revelation to the world made a shocking new statement to the world that there are no black holes. He has produced a mind-bending new theory that argues black holes do not actually exist, at least not in the way that we currently perceive them. From what we know of science and from previous research, to us black holes are basically strong singularities with high concentrations of gravitational force, or basically tears in the space-time continuum. These points of gravity are so high and so condensed that it does not even allow light to escape them. Now Stephen Hawking has come up with a theory that the way we perceive them might be wrong. So this begs the question, how important is perception or sense perception in the advancement of science? What is the significance of this knowledge question? In the time of Greek philosophers, perception played a huge role in science, whether it was for the observation of phenomenon, to identify a problem, or the observation of results for the experiment. In the time of the Greek philosophers, the philosophers observed the world around them and came up with questions such as, why is the sky blue? Why do objects slow down when in motion? And used experimentation and perception to answer these questions. Now, with the rise of branches in science such as quantum physics and physics of the galaxies, which is on the opposite end because it's on such a huge scale, reasoning has taken over as a primary way of knowing. As we in the field of quantum physics, we are unable to perceive things at such a micro level, and therefore perception has become void. Moreover, advancement in technology and the invention of precise instruments give us much more precise and accurate measurements, therefore rendering our sense perception and our senses void in the field of science. So therefore we have to ask ourselves, has our senses and sense perception become void in the field of science? These are my definitions for key terms. Science, as defined by the theory of knowledge.net, defines science as a branch of study which deals with the physical world, aka all examples physics, chemistry, geology and biology. Advancement can not only be increasing our knowledge in the fields mentioned before, but could also refer to the application of this knowledge or improvement of technology. Are any of the faculties of sight, smell, hearing, taste and touch by which the body perceives an external stimulus. This is also from the theory of knowledge.net. My personal knowledge is that as a science student, many of the practical experiments I conduct are of a simpler nature, and therefore require the usage of perception, such as titrations in chemistry, which require us to perceive the changes in color of universal indicators to find the results of an experiment. Moreover, my syllabus includes reading up about the history of scientists from previous eras, and I have seen how much perception has played a role in the success of their science. Therefore, it causes me to question whether perception can still be important in the advancement of science now. My first perspective is that perception is no longer very important, as it is no longer required for measurement of variables. Through the advancement of technology, not only does perception become void, it becomes unnecessary as well. Through the invention of instruments such as the UV spectroscopy and pH meters, these machines reduce the measurements to numbers so that we can use mathematics to further develop theories and models that can explain phenomenon more accurately and more precisely. Moreover, perception is very limited. For examples, our eyes can perceive only in the visible light region. We cannot view the world in X-ray, infrared, or ultraviolet rays, by which we miss much of the phenomenon that goes on around us, because heated things glow in infrared, and therefore we are unable to see them because of our limited eyesight. Moreover, hearing is limited to 20 to 20,000 hertz, and our resolutions are very low and we cannot see at subatomic levels. However, observations made purely based on perceptions are limited, as we can only resolve phenomenon to a certain level by using only our senses, and therefore may be unable to see the real reason a phenomenon may be occurring as opposed to why it seems to occur to us. A good example to demonstrate this are Aristotle's theories of motion versus Newton's theories of motion. Aristotle observed that things slow down as they go the distance, as an object in motion doesn't continue to move in motion indefinitely and it slows down. From what he perceived, he concluded that objects tend to tire out, which is a logical conclusion. However, it was wrong. This was because of his lack of ability to see that the microscopic bumps between surfaces that cause friction that eventually dissipated the energy of an object, causing it to slow down, which was further corrected in Newton's theories of motion. This is a very good example of how a limited perception can make us draw wrong conclusions in science. Often our perceptions can also be affected by our expectations and conditioning by the evolutionary instincts of survival, such as the Gestalt theory. Gestalt theory basically explains that where our expectations can really affect the way we perceive things, and therefore an expectation can also cause us to perceive certain phenomenon in a way that is not actually happening. And other optical illusions can also affect the way we view the world, such as explained by Buell-Lotto. Therefore, having expectations or predictions can affect the way we perceive phenomena. Moreover, perception could be very subjective. People with symptoms such as color blindness may not perceive the world the same way as some others do. This questions the reliability of sense perception this is a way of knowing that could vary from person to person as compared to reasoning, which is constant throughout the world. My perspective too is that although sense perception may not be useful in the way of measurements and experimentation, it is useful in other parts of the scientific method, as experimentation is only one of the steps of the scientific method. Formulating questions based on observation is where perception comes into use. Reasoning is a form of building knowledge based on what we already know. Therefore, we can conclude that perception allows us to widen our base of knowledge, unlike reason, which can only build on knowledge that we already have. Phenomena such as gravitational forces and electrical forces cannot be seen, but the effects can be felt. This perception of these effects of these forces leads to curiosity of what causes them, which then leads to research on these forces. Therefore, although reasoning, mathematics and modeling, as used by James Clerk Maxwell, was used to discover electrical and magnetic forces, it is these effects that we observe in nature that created a curiosity for us to learn about them. And therefore, formulating questions and what science is about, and understanding the world around us, in these matters perception does play an important role. Since science is defined as the study of natural phenomena, one of the main ways of understanding the world is to deconstruct phenomena we perceive and understand what makes them work. However, perception is also used to correct flaws in science. We cannot possibly test every case to see if a particular conjecture is correct. Inductive reasoning is not always correct, so if the law is wrong, then only perception is what will point it out. A good example of this is Galilean relativity versus Newtonian relativity. Galileo, from the laws of motion, stated that did not consider objects at extreme speeds, such as speeds close to light, as he did not have the technology to accelerate objects or view objects that traveled at speeds close to light. Therefore, only observation allowed Newton and Einstein to understand that when objects travel close to the speeds of light, light is the ultimate speed, and the speeds of light cannot be crossed, and not as we know it. Perception allows us to observe phenomena that prove as exceptions to laws in science and that need to be modified, therefore helping us correct laws that are flawed. However, when applying scientific principles into practical technology, perception plays a huge role. We identify problems in the society using our senses, and these problems are resolved using our knowledge of science. Therefore, perception shapes the progress of our technology, as perception is used to see which problems need to be solved. However, other questions that do not. In olden days, scientists used the perception as a way of observing the phenomenon around them, and used reason as a way of predicting what were the underlying principles behind the phenomenon, and to answer questions like why bodies slow down and why bodies in motion eventually slow down, as I mentioned before. However, nowadays we try to explain events that occur by varying certain factors surrounding the event and observing and measuring the effect of this variation on the event. From this, we use reasoning to conclude why this factor affects the events in certain way. Therefore, other possible knowledge questions from this particular presentation could be: what is the importance of reason in the advancement of science? How reliable is perception as a way of knowing? Bibliography.